Good evening, everyone, and happy World Bee Day. We're so glad you're here. In normal times, this part of the evening is where we would be mingling with guests, chatting at the bar, and sharing fun science tidbits with all of you before the event formally began. Instead, we meet in this virtual breakout session, though I think you'll find this presentation every bit as fun and interesting, or even more so than party small talk. And now we join a conversation about food and climate with Dr. Ed Fleming, Curator of Anthropology, and Jasmine Conker, Anthropology Research Assistant. Ed.
Thank you, Aaliyah, and thank you for watching. We're super excited to talk a little bit about food and climate here. Jasmine and I are both archaeologists, and our work is focused in the upper Midwest. That is the Western Great Lakes and the Eastern Plains area. And we have ongoing field projects in the St. Croix Valley, in the Mississippi Valley, and out in southwestern Minnesota. So as archaeologists, we examine changes in cultural traditions and human behavior through time by looking at material evidence. And that evidence can take a variety of different forms, from artifacts and animal bone to plant remains and charcoal, to the distribution of sites themselves. But the backdrop to all culture and all culture change is always climate and the environment. Climate and the environment is always sitting in the backdrop and having some influence and impact on human behavior. So we decided to talk about food and foodways for this session because food is unifying. Food is central to culture, and it's central to what makes us human. Food also establishes and maintains relationships, whether it's relationships within our families, within our communities, across communities. Food connects us to the land and to the environment. And food in the past, as it is today, on whatever continent you're living on, is affected by shifting climates. So we're going to briefly talk about two food sources that are crucially important to indigenous societies and indigenous people in North America for thousands of years: bison and corn, or more properly, maize. And in both cases, the availability of these food sources have shifted over time due to environmental changes and due to human interaction. Leah, would you advance the slide? So I'm going to talk about bison, and then I'll pass the mic over to Jasmine to talk about corn. So first of all, bison are more than just a food source to Native people in North America. Bison are also were also a source of tools, a source of clothing, a source of shelter in some cases. And like corn, bison holds deep spiritual significance for many Native people. For over 10,000 years, people have hunted bison in North America. And, first, early on, it was Bison antiquus, an extinct species that stood over 8 feet tall, a giant bison. What followed were other extinct species like Bison occidentalis, which is in the upper left-hand picture on this slide, and then modern bison. It was estimated that prior to European contact, prior to European arrival to North America, there were some 30 to 50 million bison roaming the grasslands of the interior of North America. And bison are a grassland species, so they're tied to the bison. So let's move to Minnesota here. And Minnesota it's kind of a land of boundaries from an environmental perspective. We have a border between the prairie and the forest that runs right through the middle of our state, currently from the northwestern corner to the southeast of the state. But that prairie forest border has shifted over time as the climate has shifted. During arid, arid and warm times, the grassland has spread. During cooler or wetter climates, the forest has spread. So, for example, the period of about 5,000 to 7,000 years ago is called the Altithermal, or the Middle Holocene warm period. And that was a period of time where the climate in Minnesota and central North America was warmer and drier than it is today. And at that time, that prairie forest border shifted all the way east across the St. Croix. Almost all of Minnesota was covered in prairie at that time. And with the spread of the grasslands, so spread the range of the bison. And so we have really good evidence that there were bison herds in St. Paul 5,000 to 7,000 years ago. And one example is that bison mount that you see in that upper left-hand corner, which is on display in the museum in the We Move and We Stay exhibit, and that is Bison occidentalis, an extinct form. Now shifting slightly, one of our field sites is an island site in southwestern Minnesota, and it has a 10,000 year archaeological record. This area of southwestern Minnesota was pretty much always prairie since the last ice age. And every component of this site is associated with large quantities of bison bone. It's a good demonstration that where there were grassland, there were bison, and where there were bison, there were people. So the last thing I want to talk about is shifting forward to about 1,000 years ago, or the last 1,000 years. In the Mississippi Valley and in the forests of northern Minnesota, 1,000 years ago or 500 years ago, bison were not available, but they continued to be, they weren't available locally in these areas, but they continued to be economically and culturally important. We have good evidence from the large village sites of these areas that indigenous hunters were traveling out to the plains to harvest bison and bring bison parts back to their villages. We also have good evidence for the trade in bison parts. In the lower left image, you'll see a collection of bone tools from a village site in the Red Wing area, and it includes bison scapulas that were used as hoes. They're called bison scapula hoes. They were digging tools or gardening tools for planting and for agricultural practices. And so that's a nice segue to Jasmine. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Jasmine Conker. Jasmine, also a seasoned archaeologist, but her specialization is paleoethnobotany, and that means she studies the plant remains that we collect from archaeological sites. And those plant remains, and Aaliyah, you can shift the slide, those plant remains take the form of often of charcoal. So for the plant remains to preserve, they need to be burned. And so Jasmine goes through and identifies all the wood species and also all the cultivated seeds and cultivated plant remains that we get out of fire hearths and storage pits and trash pits. So Jasmine, take it away and tell us something about corn.
Okay. Thanks, Ed, for the introduction. I'm really excited to be here to talk to everybody about the importance of corn or maize. Maize was first domesticated in the southeastern part of Mexico in Tehuacan, roughly about 9,000 years ago. Maize is a grass plant that at first only grew in tropical environments, such as the southern parts of Mexico. When maize was domesticated, it was moved down into South America and up into North America. Maize did not move itself. The seeds had to be passed from one person to another, and with the exchange of specialized knowledge in how to grow, tend, and to take care of this plant. In North America, there was evidence of maize moving up the Mississippi River all the way up into here, up into the upper Midwest around 500 CE. The first evidence of maize in the upper Midwest was about 300 to 400 years before the medieval climatic anomaly, which was roughly about 900 CE to 1350 CE. The medieval climatic anomaly was caused by natural causations, not by humans. During this, an increase of solar radiation, decrease in volcanic eruptions, and ocean circulation created a La Nina-like event and changed the usual patterns on Earth. Maize was sprinkled into the daily subsistence usage during this time, but when the medieval climatic anomaly started around 900 CE, agricultural practices in the upper Midwest started to become more intensive. The maize boom, I would like to call it, roughly started around 1200 CE in the upper Midwest, sites in Red Wing along the Mississippi and at sites along the lower St. Croix that we've also been working on have large amounts of burned maize to support this evidence. Maize is completely dependent upon humans for reproduction and growth. Humans have to commit to growing maize. It is not self-sustainable. Maize is intentionally cared for, intended by humans for it to be successful. There are other plants that humans have also domesticated to help with the success of maize growing. Beans and squash are also a part of this narrative. In the picture on the left-hand side, you can see the Three Sisters Garden. corn, squash, and beans. This creates a symbiotic relationship among plants. Corn is not only a demanding plant to care for and tend, but is also demanding of the nutrients that it pulls from the soil. Beans were grown with the corn to help replenish the nutrients that it pulls from the soil, and corn gives the beans a place to crawl up and grow. Squash was grown around them to help provide shade, to keep the soil moist, and to help keep animals away from them. That's all I have right now, but thank you for watching our presentation today. Really means a lot to Ed and myself to be able to share our love for archaeology.